Hello, my lovelies. Well, we are living in exciting times. History is writing itself as we speak. Over the next series of videos, I'm going to take you step by step through the events that are happening now as it pertains to non-human intelligence and the woo way it all started. I'm going to highlight the mental straitjacket that is holding us back from understanding what is going on in our skies, let alone reality itself. And as you probably know, this anomaly that they're calling the melee all began with Clif High. Well, it didn't actually begin with Clif High, but this is where it got really interesting because he predicted all about it. Now, I'm going to take a few moments to elaborate on some of the details here as they illuminate the dance we're going to have to do if we're going to wrap our arms around what is actually going on in the skies and reality. So even though you think you know the Clif High story, stick with me as it builds us a solid foundation. And if you don't know Clif High, he is a radical iconoclast. His Substack is called Ether Pirates of the Materium, which in itself provides some clues. The story goes that in 1997, Clif and his friend George created what is now called the WebBot to predict stock market trends. The WebBot is a linguistic prediction system designed to analyze vast amounts of text data from the internet to identify emerging trends, significant events, or society's underlying emotional tones. You see, the WebBot operates on the premise that human beings collectively generate psychic impressions, which are captured in our language and emotional tone online, and that we can use this information to predict things. And that makes sense, right? If we're all saying Bud Light sucks, we can predict that very soon Anheuser-Busch's stock will go down in the not too distant future. Makes sense, right? But here's the kicker. The WebBot started to predict things way in the future, things that had not even been invented or named or made famous yet, right? Things like Bitcoin, which didn't even exist, or the idea of podcasts where one person could talk to millions of people without a big media company being involved. I don't know if you know, but the WebBot predicted in 2008 that Joe Rogan, who was a minor celebrity at the time, would be speaking with Donald Trump. And that would be an important temporal marker, which I will explain in a moment. But let's not lose sight of the prediction first. The prediction alone implies that humans in 2008 somehow not only knew there would be a podcast between Rogan and Trump, but somehow our online chatter about it 16 years before it happened was important enough to show up as an anomaly by the WebBot. This means that humans en masse have precognition. That's huge. Now, the idea that humans are indeed psychic was also something Ingo Swann talked about. He believed that all humans have innate superpowers, including being psychic. The thing is, they're just not nurtured within our society. Let's see what Ingo says about it.
Did you know we have innate powers?
In his exploration of human potential, Ingo Swann revealed that we've buried extraordinary capabilities deep within us.
In the past, shamans of the Russian steppes, Mongolia, Tibet, and among sages of all forms of Eastern mystics, things like remote viewing were taken for granted and nurtured. You know what the Aborigines of Australia do? They sit around fires all the time, time tripping, space tripping, going everywhere. That's what they do. Wise men and women of ancient and even modern Africa, there's a lot of African cultures that have things like remote viewing and influencing things by intention. There are traditions in Mexico and Peru, the shamans of the American Indians. Well, they're really hot on this kind of stuff, you know. Do you know we have receptors for heat sensing in our palms, magnetic heat sensing, And a good Indian can hold his hand up and say, yeah, the enemy's over there. I can feel their fires in my hand. There's also intuition, telepathy, clairvoyance, ESP, and of course, remote viewing.
But before we get deeper into the WebBot, it's interesting to note that this is not the only technology tapping into human consciousness. The Global Coherence Initiative, which is part of the Princeton-based Global Consciousness Project, also ran an experiment about human consciousness. For this experiment, they had 65 random number generators placed globally. And what happened was that scientists noticed that during extreme emotion-evoking events, such as the death of Princess Diana or the 9/11 attacks, that the randomness of these numbers being generated notably decreased. The numbers that were generated became more ordered and more patterned. But here's the fascinating part. These patterns began emerging up to a day before the events occurred. Okay, so that human consciousness was affecting the random generation of numbers because of emotion before the event actually occurred. So let's break this down. The findings suggest that humans might possess a collective precognitive ability, sensing significant events before they occur. It also says something about space-time. Space and time may not be linear or fixed as we think. Instead, they could be part of a dynamic, interconnected web where information flows in ways that challenge our conventional understanding of causality. The data also points to the existence of a global interconnected field of human awareness. It suggests that individual consciousness is not isolated but part of a larger shared network capable of responding to or even anticipating major global events. This also speaks to non-local awareness. The findings challenge the idea that our awareness is confined to our bodies or immediate surroundings. Instead, it may operate on a non-local level, interacting with distant or unseen events. And finally, it suggests technological interaction. The disruption of randomness in the number generation machines suggests that human consciousness and collective emotional energy might extend beyond biological or organic forms, potentially influencing machines in measurable ways. And again, this is not the only time this has been discovered. I will let Rupert Sheldrake tell this story.
Some people have a jinx on machines. Some physicists were, theoretical physicists were reputed to have such a strong jinx that they were people trying to keep them out of their labs, because if they went into the lab, sort of the apparatus broke down. On the other hand, some people seem to have just a bit like green fingers or green thumbs with plants. Some people just have a soothing effect on machines. But basically, one of the more interesting experiments on a robot was done by a French scientist called René Péoc. And I discuss this in my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, which is my book about the unexplained powers of animals. He created a robot that moved according to a random event generator. Basically, if the mind is going to act on a machine, it's going to work much more easily if there's something random that it can influence rather than a fully determinate system. Much harder to see how that could happen. So you had a machine that was, the way it moved depended on a random element. And if this random element fired in one way, it would make the machine turn in one direction as opposed to a different direction. He then got day-old chicks. And as you probably know, day-old chicks and day-old ducklings imprint on the first moving object they see. They follow it. So he imprinted them on this robot. And the day-old chicks followed it around. Then he put them in a cage at the side of an area where the robot was. And they couldn't follow it because they were in a cage. They couldn't get, but they desperately wanted to be near it. They thought it was their mother. And what happened then is that the robot spent much more time near the day-old chicks. If you took the day-old chicks away, it moved at random in the control condition. So here was an example of their deep intention, their instinctive need to be near this robot on which they'd imprinted, influencing random events within it.
So let's get back to Clif's WebBot again, shall we? Clif's WebBot generates temporal markers. A temporal marker is like a clue in a big puzzle about time. It's something that happens at a time now or at a certain time that gives us a hint about what's going to happen later. And this is a big deal. In the materialist view, the future is fundamentally indeterminate and cannot be predicted. However, with the WebBot, temporal markers foreshadow specific events, like the podcast. And this suggests an interconnectedness between human thought and future outcomes. Time is not what we think. This shows us that time and causality allows future events to ripple backward, influencing a present consciousness. And here is where it gets even more crazy, okay? By predicting future events based on current language trends, the system implies that language is not merely descriptive but formative, okay? By analyzing language trends to predict future events, it assumes that the words and emotions people express collectively create ripples that influence outcomes, okay? This is like the idea of participatory or consciousness-based model of the universe, where human thought and communication plays a formative role in reality, rather than merely reflecting it. In the beginning was the Word, and all that kind of thing. Okay? So what we have on our hands here, my lovelies, is a whole bunch of anomalies as far as our science today is concerned. And that, my friend, is the point. Anomalies point to a problem with our current understanding. It means we have holes in our model, which means we ignore all kinds of data about the world around us. As Rupert Sheldrake says, we just shove it under the carpet. And if we ignore that data, then as they say, garbage in, garbage out. So in the next video, I'm going to point to some other huge holes in our scientific knowing that, if filled, could explain some of this anomalous activity we're seeing occurring in our skies. So subscribe, ring the bell, ding-a-lingy thing, share this if it was interesting, and there will be more soon, lovelies.
When we deal with the ancient mysteries, it's not a problem that can be solved with one particular approach.
A myriad of diverse approaches are required.
The Egyptian temple can be regarded as an exhaustive, encyclopedic summary of information. It contains effectively all that can be known about the principle to which it is consecrated.
They're using key symbols that they wouldn't be using if they didn't know this stuff.
Experts in a broad spectrum of disciplines.
Art is the bridge between science and spirituality. It has no allegiance to either camp.
If you look at ancient Egypt through the eyes of an artist, you see a very different place. As soon as we started reading the message, we began to understand why there's so much gatekeeping and trolling surrounding these subjects. The ancient message is in many ways the very definition of taboo.
The ancient Egyptians understood the brain and how to achieve altered states of consciousness.
The hypnagogic state, or third force, is the way into the unconscious.
I was interested in seeing if I could determine a biological basis of mystical states.
Our brains have been designed to allow in other realms and other realities that have been there all the time, surrounding us in every way, in all directions.
This intelligence of the heart, or this kind of consciousness up here of the two, it generates this kind of more living, dynamic perception of the world. So, and isn't that like the Uraeus crown and his Kundalini and the third eye?
Fueling astonishing revelations.
These are people who actually practice Tantra, were initiated into Tantra. And that Tantra still exists today.
The sexual energy climbs the spine to the brain, and that The result is an awakening, artistic expression, realization, enlightenment.
We see this all the time in Egypt. The pharaoh wears a diadem with the cobra head jutting forth from it.
Revelations from even the most occulted sources.
Egyptology is this peculiar sort of weaving together of some inaccurate esoterics woven in with some definitely inaccurate truth claims about the material nature of reality. So the upshot of that is we have the most materialist cosmology humans have ever come up with, attempting to describe almost the least materialist human cosmology we've ever come up with.
They realized that you could actually hack the operating system of the universe.
I read every single Greco-Egyptian papyri on magic that's ever been found. And it's amazing, you know, magic could be looked at as a technology. Something you do and you get a certain result.
Egypt itself, if you think about it, the egregore of ancient Egyptian magic is quite potent, and it has survived to this day and enthralls us to this day.
Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will.
The one topic that unites all Egyptian religious, spiritual, and magical practice is the concept of Heka.
So what it says to me when I see a gathering like this, which is truly eclectic and has brought together people from many different fields, I think that's it's a very good sign. It's a sign that the world is moving into a new area of inquiry.
Like Isis resurrecting Osiris to birth Horus, restoring order to the world, we resurrect ancient Egypt in our hour of need. Come explore the other Egypt. The resurrected Egypt. Magical Egypt.